Hi, thank you for joining us. My name's Bal.
And my name's Taj.
And we are from the Changing Suits podcast, which you're going to get a bit of a reveal actually today. This is our newly launched podcast, which is going to be called The Cultural Barrier. So you are the first ones to know, and anyone listening online as well. So Changing Suits, for those who are new to the Changing Suits podcast and the organisation, is about looking at cultural barriers for diverse communities not only within the community, but also between communities as well. So one thing we're really keen on doing through Changing Suits as the organisation is to make sure that service providers are there to support the diverse communities that we have, not only in Swindon, but across the UK. So on today's live podcast, thank you for joining us. We will be talking about, firstly, why we started the podcast. I think that's a really important place to start. Looking at the past, which we've found is really important to understand how when we're bringing up our kids, the impact of our past, and also technology and the future as well, because I think that's a really important place for our kids especially, for us to think about what's next for us in bringing up our children as well. So looking at the podcast and why we started, go on Taj, I'm going to let you in here. Why did we start?
Thank you for letting me in. Right, so the reason why we started is essentially the stigma around quite a lot of taboo topics in the community. Bal, name a topic.
You could choose any topics. There's very few within the South Asian community that don't have stigma. We'll talk about things like, I don't know,
cancer.
Cancer, there we are. That's a taboo topic. Let's talk about that. What we found when we were growing up was healthcare was one of those topics which you didn't go outside and tell people, if I had a health problem, you're not going to be telling anyone, because essentially as we grow up as Asian women, there's that fear of what will the community say, and then also what impact that then has on your lives.
I mean, one important thing was, I remember even wearing glasses was a big thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Don't tell anyone that you wear glasses because no one's going to marry you. Like, that means nothing now, because I think most of us wear glasses. Most of us wear glasses now.
And thank God for contact lens and the laser eye surgery, which I have had, just to let you know.
I wish it was around when we were younger, but that was a big thing as well.
Yes.
Yeah, don't tell anyone if you've got, I don't know, inhaler, or if you wear glasses, because that means they're not going to marry you. Don't tell anyone that you've got these health problems. So it was almost hiding away your health issues. I wouldn't think that, they're big things these days, yeah.
So this actually led us to start talking about not only our own lives and the positives and the negatives, because one thing that is really important for us is to show the positives of our culture as well. And I'll tell you why that's really shown its importance over the last few months, I'd say. So we ourselves have been through, like most people, some issues within our family. And when we went into hospital, for example, we did actually find that the stigma that was created in a pretty diverse hospital, you would have seen people that were from different colours, different faiths and groups. The sort of reaction we got from medical professionals to us, and it was a real shock to us. We were there to support my brother, for example, and there was a big thing of, in the South Asian community, in-laws is a big thing. If you're not from, we've got people from the South Asian community, there's that thing of the in-laws are evil. That is just how it is. You'll see it in the films. If you've ever watched Bollywood films, you would have seen, yep, they're the worst people in the world. Now, I can't say that, especially because my husband's here today as well. But I love my in-laws, okay? But the issue that we faced on the other side was maybe a healthcare professional thinking, oh, you're the sister-in-laws. What does that mean? Is there some kind of pressure that you're putting on my sister-in-law? And we're like, whoa, we're here to support. And then that got us to thinking, what is the difference between how we've been brought up within, I don't want to use the word traditional because that's always got a negative connotation, within a household where our parents were from India, and what that then brought over as well. Because community is a massive thing within the South Asian community, as it is within other diverse communities. And what that means is they're there for the support.
I mean, an example is going for a hospital visit. Now, you'd have about 2 people that can come to visit you on one ward, which is understandable because of the capacity and the size of it. But think of an Asian family how many cousins. I mean, family means your cousins, your aunts, your uncles. Anyone that you meet is an aunt or an uncle. So they'd want to come and visit. So this 2-visit thing,
it doesn't work for a South Asian community. And we know that because we lived with our granddad. And so whenever he'd go into hospital, plus he had a lot of friends, he was a very sociable character. So he'd have about 7-8 people around his bed. We didn't worry about the health impacts of that, obviously. But that's something that we need to consider. Even when I was at work, you know, I remember I had to have some time off because we had a death in the family. But unfortunately, they weren't the immediate family. They weren't brother, sister, mum, dad. They went further up. But they were our family. Surely, what's the problem? And this is where we start comparing, okay, what is acceptable in the Western world and what have we been brought up with that mix of the Eastern and the Western?
I think it gets really confusing as well, as being a child growing up, how difficult it is to balance that and understand, okay, when you're at home, you have to act in a certain way, you are in a certain way, and then when you're outside, you have to act or be in a certain way. So you might be, I don't know, a woman that's a CEO outside in the world, and then when you come at home, you're the mum, you have to do it the certain ways. Women, there's a great expectation for women to be doing this, doing that, and it's just expected. She'll be in the kitchen. Things are changing, but very slowly.
And then that brought us onto another topic. Is there actually that much of a difference between the way that the Eastern world does it and the Western world? Because to be fair, in the UK, we know women are predominantly the people that tend to cook. Yes, that's changing. My husband's actually really great at cooking, by the way. And again, it's not just because he's sitting here. He's fantastic at cooking. However, that cultural sort of thought of, actually, I do need to bring up my kids. I do need to make sure my family, my in-laws, if not as well as my own family, is okay, essentially. So the thoughts behind that. So when I went back after maternity leave, and by the way, one thing you should know from our podcast is we chuck in a few analogies, as you can see, from our lives, because this is what we based our podcast on. This is very much about our lives, and then when guests come on, what's actually happened in their lives. So when I went back to work, there was that sort of mother guilt, which it doesn't matter what community you come from, you get that mother guilt. And it's actually sort of more highlighted, I suppose, within diverse communities, and it might even be picked up from, you know, whether it's relatives of, are you sure you want to go back to work? And that is a question. To be fair, we've been quite lucky, because one thing that, especially our dad, we've got 3 sisters. That's a taboo as well. You can't have 3 girls in the same family.
So 3 sisters altogether. So
3 sisters.
One more of us.
Yes.
Which is wonderful. I know you are seeing.
And then we had a younger brother. Yeah, lucky we had that younger brother. Otherwise, you know, we don't know what would have happened after that. But we were always pushed to make sure we worked. Because one thing our dad, and this is where the past comes into it, he was a man that came from India. He was very much of that thought of, yeah, maybe women do need to stay in the household and men go out and sort of work and are protectors. And as we grew, his mind changed as well. So he came to the UK. And one of the questions I asked him was, firstly, how did you feel about coming into the UK? And it was a case of, actually, I was doing this for my family. So there was no regret, which is fantastic. But one thing that changed was because there was 3 girls and the community around us, we were predominantly around South Asian people. We tend to stick within groups, we do. And what had happened was, you know, we'd had a divorce in our family. At a time, that divorce didn't really happen. And that really changed his view on things. And what he said was the importance of women being independent, being able to be financially stable on their own. And that's something we've been really lucky on. But that doesn't happen in a lot of some. I'm not going to say a lot because the world's changing, but that doesn't quite always happen. And so we've been lucky because it just meant that we could have a platform like Changing Suits where we could talk about our lives. And to be fair, our parents don't actually understand what we still do, but it's fine. But they're happy with it. It's all good. But it meant that we could talk about our lives and sort of pick up on topics, have great conversations with service providers, and sort of realise that, oh, it's done in a different way in other communities. So our past, as we bring that part to a close, was the fact that we had grown up in a South Asian community, in a household, with our cousins. We'd be around there pretty much every weekend. So the community aspect was there. But as we started to do the podcast, one thing we realised was a lot of topics, like Taj said earlier, things like cancer, things like domestic abuse, things like alcohol abuse, a wide number of topics are not spoken about in our community. And we started to ask guests, what's the reason for this? Why are people not talking about it? What's the stigma behind it?
Everyone was saying the same thing. What will the community say? And that pretty much holds us back from doing new things, telling or building awareness in the community about, for example, domestic abuse, cancer. If we were able to openly talk with the community, we'd be able to build this awareness. But everyone's worried about what will others say? How will I be judged? And that's what stops us from being and sharing what we're going through.
And this is why I started off and said, look, there are so many positives in diverse communities. The first one being the community. It's been absolutely fantastic being so close to family and friends and a community. There was something that someone said actually. Someone said, it takes a community to raise a child. And I think that's obviously starting to get lost, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go forward in this talk. But the positive was that community. But again, when we were talking to people on the podcast, that community was also drawing out a negative. What would people say?
I mean, financially, the community supported each other. So you'd come over, quite a lot of people used to live in the same house. People used to rent, and you would share financial problems. You'd loan each other money, and you'd come and go around each other's houses. That doesn't happen so much, because if someone comes around to our house, I'm like, oh my God, I'll have to tidy up. I don't want to cook. I don't want them to come round. And essentially, the community is starting to break up because we aren't depending on each other. And our question at one point was, is this creating mental health issues in the community as well? Something that our dad shared with you, wasn't it? About how we aren't sharing and supporting each other anymore.
And then that's where service providers come into it. So as our communities are breaking down, and that's within all communities, it's not just within the South Asian community, all diverse communities, doesn't matter what colour you are, especially where we are in the Western world, it's a different way of looking at things. So where you've got a very community-oriented sort of thing within the East, yes, that carries on. Again, that's breaking up in those countries as well. We then come to the UK, where we've been brought up to think about community, but actually, now it's changing, like Taj said. And one of the things that I remember, I did a podcast with our parents, and what they said was, in the times when they came over here, because I asked them, I was like, why have these things changed? They said, because people depended on each other then. And now we've got to a point where actually we're quite independent, which is a fantastic thing. I'm happy that I can go out and work and do whatever I need to. There's no problem with that. But it also means that I'm less dependent on others. And so we start thinking very much as individuals. And so that mental health aspect of this is, before we were sharing things with our family. They were our support circles. And as we became more scared and less dependent on the communities around us, we're then increasing that impact on ourselves because, again, we're not sharing. So that's where service providers come in. And when we're talking to service providers and we're saying, look, you're telling us that you're not able to engage and you're not reaching those communities despite you really trying, because especially from, funding aspects and, where strategies are going, it's always, we need to go to those areas where there are inequalities. And unfortunately, those very much tend to be areas where they are more diverse.
But I'm just going to jump in there.
Sorry, go on.
One thing that also happens is funding is a big thing as well for services as well. So when you get funding, and it's starting to get less and less in different charities, in the voluntary sector. So we have to start thinking broadly. Now, broadly means that we're not thinking about those cultural nuances. So we haven't got time, we haven't got capacity to think about those anymore. And hence why we're getting cases where people aren't using services because they're not understanding diverse communities. One, we can't just blame the service provider for that. There is lack of capacity. But the thing is this always going to be an issue? So we've been going on about this for years, and we're still at the point of, okay, we need to get leaflets in different languages. Why are we still at that point?
So I'm going to ask you a question here, Taj.
Oh God, I can answer it. Go on then.
Okay. We know that inequalities tend to happen within mainly diverse communities. Not all the time, but we know here in Swindon, we know that is an issue, and other areas as well, especially within London as well. Who's at blame for this? Because
I don't think there's a particular blame, but one thing is language in itself. For example, quite a lot of service providers use the term hard to reach. Now that really gets under my skin because communities aren't hard to reach. We're reaching them. And we worked in the South Asian community, but now we're working with the Polish community, we're working with the Black community. So how comes we are able to do this even with different communities as well that are, I would say, underserved, not hard to reach?
Do you like how Taj totally ignored my question? Just so
You
that she
usually
could
do
say
that.
what she needed to say. And that happens a lot on the podcast, by the way.
But I think I kind of answered what you said. It is a case of the funding is always an issue. Let's be realistic. The world goes round. You need money to fund everything. So I think that's a major point. Another thing is communities are really close-knit. So they depend on each other and they don't want almost things to, you don't agree? Go outside the community.
But then we've just said that communities are less open with each other because of that. What will the community say?
I mean, even in South Asian community, there's subsections in the South Asian community. Certain communities won't mix with other communities.
But why?
Because everyone wants to show that there's nothing wrong with them. The perfect picture.
But then when we had that issue in hospital, where we were like the evil in-laws.
We didn't complain, did we?
We didn't complain. Why didn't we complain though?
Because we were at the doctor's mercy. We had to, they were, ultimately the ones that were going to give the medication, give the medical advice. So we were like, let them do what they want to. Let them be as racist as they want, as long as they do their job. That was the realistic situation. And we went away there. I think by then we were so worn down, we didn't go to complain, which is bad because now that will have a knock-on effect with the next person that comes along, because they will probably go through a similar thing. I mean, with our brother, just bringing that up, he's a Turban Singh, so, but he was born in the UK. He's got no Indian accent or anything like that. So it was quite obvious he was born in the UK, but the doctor said to him, in our country, this is how we follow things. And we were like, okay, when he told us about this, we were like, okay, that's nice. But even if he did have an Indian accent, still you wouldn't use, it's not nice to use those words. It's like saying, you're the outsider, you're wrong, the way we do it is right.
Okay, so bringing that back, and just to let you know, that was actually the conversation. All three of us were in that room at that point and we were like, whoa. We didn't complain because we are at the mercy, and we know this happens in communities all the time. I mean, there was a story, I saw last year within maternity services, there was a change within government because the way diverse communities were being treated during maternity care was a real issue. And there's that fear because you are at mercy of medical professionals.
But even to the point, this happens quite a lot, and we're seeing it more and more as we're getting a little bit older. So we don't live near our parents. You live about an hour away. I live about 2 hours away. But we phone the GP surgery to make appointments for them because my mum, for example, has got an Indian accent.
She knows English though.
She
That's
knows
not a problem.
English, but now whenever she's on the phone, she can't get an appointment. Basically, she's questioned of why she's going to get the appointment. So this has knocked her confidence, and now we're making the appointments for them, hospital appointments, GP surgery appointments. And this is such a common story, and we're seeing that quite a lot of people from our generation are doing the same. I've got friends who are need care for their parents, and their parents, again, aren't phoning for the care. They're doing it an hour, 2 hours living away from where they are. They're doing it on the phone for them.
The scene is changing. As we are the second generation in in the UK, British. We are British born, firstly, because these comments, these sort of actions, we're actually quite used to it. Like I said earlier, we've been brought up in an extended family. Our grandparents had health problems. We would call the ambulance, at midnight if...
It was turn by turn, wasn't it? No, it's your turn, now it's your turn.
And we were children. But we know that. And that's something, when we're looking at the first generation that do come here, there is that language barrier, 100% there is. But what we're talking about is something beyond that language barrier. There's a cultural barrier. The language barrier is quite an easy one. Taj mentioned it earlier, actually. The language barrier is quite easy to overcome. Well, not easy to overcome, but leaflets, quite an easy way. I mean, 2025, I always say, how are we still having this conversation about leaflets? I never...
We're using Google Translate a lot. I had to translate Polish, we were doing a survey. It was about vaccine, and we Google translated it, didn't we? And then I gave it to someone to look over to make sure that it was all correct. And she was like, she thought, oh my God, you translated it very well. And I was like, yes, I'll take the credit. No, it's Google. But there are times that we have to be careful. For example, in Konkani, if you translate, it does not translate into what it's meant to actually be. So, okay, we're advancing, we're growing and we're getting better, but we're still not there yet.
The language thing is a really interesting one. We've had events where we've had 150, 200 people in a room, right? And then the presentation is being given, and it's plus 65, so we know that language would potentially, will be an issue there. And we've had presentations being done in English.
Lost in translation, isn't it?
We've kind of lost the opportunity to talk to 150, 200 people about a medical issue because we've done it in English. So that always makes us a question, look, the staffing within service providers surely needs to reflect what the community out there is. And we know funding's an issue.
But why is that not happening? Recruitment. Why aren't we reflecting what the community is about and recruiting the reflection of, the community that's coming through? What do you think the reason for that is?
Whether there's systematic problems as well. I can't answer that. I mean, it'd be interesting in the Q&A to get your sort of thought on this one, actually. But it's really interesting the language is one area, like I said, but culturally, that's a massive thing. It's beyond the language. Because what we are finding is where people are not approaching services for support, it very much comes down to, like we said way at the start, of there is an issue of people engaging because they've been told, what will the community think if you go and get that support?
I can give you an example. For example, I needed support with mental health. So I went to someone, I don't like asking for help. I think that's just ingrained. You just get on, just be quiet and get on with it. So I did go for my appointment, and I think I credit the counsellor. She said to me, I really do not understand where you're coming from because I don't understand your background. Credit to her. She put her hands up and she didn't muddle along and pretend that she could support me. It was that lack of cultural understanding. I tried to explain the backstory, but it was just so exhausting doing that. Trying to explain, okay, this is how it is living in Eastern household. And it was just time consuming. And when you're at that breaking point, you don't want to be doing that. You want to just get on with the issue and try to have support with that.
Then going back, we know that there's not, if we talk about counsellors, there's not enough people from the South Asian community who are counsellors. So that's where the community, where we said earlier, we tend to stick in groups. And that, again, is actually a cultural issue when we came...
we might want to mention... So I'm going to interject.
Do you love how she... I'm still talking. I'm halfway through my thought. Go on.
We done an event called Sahara Health Fair, and we didn't use the word mental health. Mm-hmm. What was the reason for that?
Sahara in a South Asian language, it means support. Mental health has a big taboo around it within the South Asian community. So if I went out and said, we are doing a mental health event, we would have gotten, yeah, please come. No one would have turned up. They wouldn't have. And so the reason we use Sahara is just support. That's it. And someone actually said to us at that event, it was a service provider, a white man who is in the services, and he said, oh, Bal, I didn't know this was a mental health event. I go, that's because you don't know the South Asian language. You didn't know Sahara meant support. But again, it's about that communication. We've got absolutely fantastic relationships with service providers, and we can have those conversations in our meetings of, oh, this is what this means, opening that conversation. Because one of the things that we are finding is, as a community, if we are so ingrained in staying within our communities because of the fear of what's going on outside, we're sort of stuck. We don't have the support. Support services probably won't be the colour that you're hoping. That's just how it is, which obviously needs to change. But we need to make a step as part of diverse communities to also build that bridge. And that's where our organisation came in, and it's about raising awareness. Talk about the issues that you do have. Get that support from wherever you need to get it. We won't be telling anyone in the community that you need that support, but go out and get that support.
I mean, one thing I think is really lovely with the service providers that we work with is our conversations amongst us in a safe space. We're not PC amongst each other because we have built that friendship, and they'll ask us, oh, can we say it like this? I'm like, no, why are you even saying that? I'm going to tell the world. No. So we've built that relationship up with the people that we work with, and I think that's very important. Where something is coming from is very important. If they're asking, if it's being asked, oh, is it okay to say it this way? We know that they're not being offensive. They're being open with us because we've built that friendship with them to say, let's talk, let's see how we can do this together. And that's why I think Changing Suits has worked the way it has, working hand in hand with the service providers, almost like being a bridge between the community and the service providers.
That relationship building is key to this. And it's something that, unfortunately, going back to funding, service providers don't have the capacity to do that. And that's a real shame, because if we looked at it in a long-term scenario, you'd actually be saving a lot more money doing that relationship building, because you could just pick up the phone, like we get, oh, Taj, is this okay to say? Should I be doing this? Where should I be going? Mm-hmm. And we're quite open with that information. And that would be the same thing if we also did this in a long-term view, rather than saying, well, actually, I just need to get in and worry about the outputs rather than the outcomes.
Another thing is, in the past, we have worked on a certain project where it was just a tick box exercise. Believe me, the community know when it's a tick box exercise, and you break up the trust of the community if you start doing that. And I think it was really early on that we had this tick box exercise project that we were doing. We didn't realise at the time, but by the end of it, we was like, okay, this was a tick box, completely something we do not like. And we decided from there on that we would, any project that we took on, that we'd make sure that it was for the benefit of the community, that it really meant that there would be a change for the community. And part of the reason that we want it to be real change is because I meet these people every day. I'm in the community. So it has to be real change. And I think it's even deeper when you're in the community and you've faced quite a lot of these challenges, these problems. You're more passionate about doing things and helping.
There was an event that we had a little while, last year, where it was a dance event. Like I've said, no one's going to go to. Unfortunately, I know some of you don't want to hear this, but no one wants to go to a health event where it's just about, unfortunately, cancer. I wouldn't go to it. We just don't do it. And one thing we do try to do is put in that cultural element. So maybe it's a dance. And this is to give you some ideas.
Or blood pressure checks.
Or blood pressure. We love blood. I mean, there's many taboos within our community. Blood pressure and diabetes is not one of the taboos.
We are quite around talking about that.
Yeah, we're quite happy to say, yep, we've got a sugar problem. that means diabetes, you've got diabetes. So we're quite happy with that. So just find those topics that don't have stigma around them. But the other way we have done it is we have introduced things like dance events, whether it's Bollywood dance, whether it's Bhangra, whether it's Gidda. And this is something we did last year with an event where we spoke about cancer actually in that event. And now we've got to a point where if the community is coming to our events, they know that they will be getting education behind whether it's a health topic or anything else that is. They know that's expected now. You know, if we have an event where there is no topic, we get that question of where's that awareness?
Food is an important element as well.
Food is really important. Make sure there's samosas, a bit of tea. We're happy. We don't go crazy, but food is really important within diverse communities. But the other part is also we all need to play a role in this. What was really interesting in that event was the community was so open to have that conversation. But during that dance event, we actually said to service providers, get involved. You do the dance as well. Because the importance of that is it gets rid of the you versus us situation. Because until we have that situation, we've still got a bridge that needs to be built. Whereas actually, we as an organisation can step back and say, perfect, you're part of that event. You're doing it. You're having fun with the community.
It's the familiarity, isn't it? It's building the relationship, building the friendships. If you see that face here, there and everywhere, you're willing to go and approach them, ask for the support that you need because they're just part of your circle now.
Yeah. And it's the time that you spend with them. Now, going back to, I don't know how long we've got left.
About 10 minutes.
Okay, now the future. Thank you very much. So we've spoken about the now, we've spoken about the past, we've spoken about what's going on and what we're seeing as an organisation. Now, what's going on in the future? Like I said, when we started the podcast, it was really to change the sort of field for our kids. That essentially was why we did it. You know, we've been through things, both positive, negative. Like I've said, we've been really lucky growing up. But what are the things that need changing, especially for our kids? And what external pressures also come with that? Now, when we talk about AI, it always has a negative. I always say AI is going to take over the world. I love AI, by the way.
I was going to say ChatGPT all the way.
I'm a big fan of AI. But what does that also bring with it? What are the challenges? What are the things that we need to worry as from diverse communities, but also from service provision as well? Now, one of the things that I find really interesting in some of the conversations I've been having with people is obviously the AI is only as good as the data that goes in, right? So us as diverse communities, if we do not engage with services who are using AI, that data is not going in which case what's coming out is probably going to be even worse than where we are right now, where you have such big inequalities. And so we're at a point now where we're saying from diverse communities, we need to step up ourselves. We need to get involved in communities. We need to build those bridges. But that's also from service providers' point of view as well. Service providers have much more money, hundreds and thousands of pounds that the community won't have. We know that, which is why the onus is on service providers to take those steps and move towards the community and say, hey, we want to build these relationships. This is really important. Because until we do that, those inequalities are just going to be increased as AI starts to churn out whatever it churns out. We don't know what's around the corner. But surely we need to be now at this point where we are on a bit of a stepping stone for AI. We need to start making those moves now. Otherwise, it's just going to get worse. Now, when we come to our kids, and I know Taj is really impassioned about this social media and
that's because I'm on it 24/7.
Technology. But what impact is that having on our kids? Go for it, Taj.
Well, should I say what impact it's having on me? Forget about the kids. Because I am constantly on social media, the brain is just constantly moving, and not having that pause and being bored. And we've heard quite a lot of dementia cases going up because our brain is not getting the time out and letting our children be bored as well.
And how does this relate to the South Asian community and other diverse communities? Well, we're becoming more and more individualised. I don't know if that's a word, but there we are, putting a new word there. Those communities are breaking up even more because, unfortunately, those Facebook friends of mine I don't know half of them. So it's a bit of a problem. But what we're trying to say is, as our kids are growing up, one thing that is really important to me is I actually instill those things that my parents did instill in us. And now, as a parent, I realise how important they are. And we need to take the positives of both the Western and the Eastern cultures, because there are so many amazing things from both cultures. On the flip side, we know there are a lot of negatives, like we've been talking about previously, from both cultures. And through talking, like platforms like this, the podcast, the events that we have, we're really keen on opening those conversations up. And actually talking about the positives and negatives.
Shall we stop there and ask if there are any questions? That might be the...
That was my ending. I was going to finish up there.
Sorry, ruined that. So should we find out if there's any questions that anyone wants to ask us? Or we can carry on talking. You can tell we haven't got a problem with that.
We've got loads of questions. Go for it.
I'm a pharmacist.
Yeah.
And the community I serve is very top heavy in South Asians and Black Africans. And I often pick up on the things you've mentioned today. And I guess in some ways I'm lucky that growing up, we are exposed to a lot of films from India. So you pick up a lot of things.
All the dancing.
All the dancing.
Do you want to show us a move?
So I was quite shocked when I went to Calcutta and there was no dancing on the street, because I thought that was what would happen.
Are you going to ask us to dance?
But similarly, as people will say to me, the lions roam around the streets in Nigeria as well. So, but anyway, we digress somewhat. So basically, I guess for me, in terms of what I see on a day-to-day is, you've nailed it on the head in terms of the community needs to engage with the providers, but it's a case of no one's listening. And that's what I find.
Mm-hmm.
It's a time to listen that is probably more important. Because in order for you to understand, you've got to listen first. And we're so rushed in terms of expectation and demand that we need to find new ways first, or as part of, as we go on, new ways of changing services. And one of the things I have really focused on, therefore, is the one-to-one is not going to be, has to be reserved for the most in need. Because you've got multiple situations, including language barrier, technology illiteracy.
Yep.
You assume people can read.
Yeah.
I've had deaf patients. What are we going to do? And there are people that are South Asian deaf or blind. They just are not South Asian. And that's it.
Yeah.
They come as a mixture of all sorts that you've got to consider as well. So therefore, for me, one step for that reason I've taken is group consultations, where you can deliver your message, as you've said, on a bigger platform for things that are common to all. But nonetheless, when we talk about cultural competencies, and I do feel for those that in some way, you're not invading their country, you live here, you pay your tax and everything else as well. There's also understanding that there are groups of people that are British, so to say. And there's also understanding and having that middle ground that we want to learn from one another. And it's really, how do you ensure that that foundation is laid? It's not one side needs it, both sides needs it in different ways. As much as they need to learn or understand the South Asian culture needs to understand the other culture as well and where they're coming from. You can't change people's culture for you, but you need to understand. And therefore, utilizing this kind of platform is really great to see. And I was even aware that you did other, I thought it was just South Asian, because you mentioned Polish, and you mentioned about, hard to reach words are the words that often come out. Of course, some people would say maybe you're strategically ignoring them as opposed to hard to reach. So how do you go beyond, because you mentioned about festivals and everything, and I think really laying the foundations about starting with the children. Because I can only but imagine how confused they must be. My kids, when I change my tone, like, oh, that's it, they know. Okay, so these are cultural nuances that I think is really important, that we do not forget our culture. Otherwise, we're all going to be the same.
Yeah.
There's a beauty in diversity, and it's harnessing that positivity as well. But I really think we need to start with the children in terms of even health knowledge, because you've now got a mixture of South Asian, very strict, don't do this until this, don't do that until this, and then you're mixing with potential children that would, contraceptives, conversation, sex before, and all that to go with. That how do you get to those platforms to ensure that before they become adults, how you can mold them? Are you in those spaces?
So I'm just going to answer. I'm going to answer a few bits, and then I'm going to let you take over the hard bits.
All right then.
So talking about reaching our children as well, we've had quite a lot of service providers coming to us and talking about contraception, sex. Now, sex in the South Asian community, or the Polish community, or the Black community. Like, it's hard to say even that word. So we've had to build it around, for example, having a mother and daughter event or something like that. But we talk to the parents, and we'd have to cater around how the community will accept the message, because there are certain events, for example, if you called it sex event or something like that, no one's going to come
Well,
to
to be
it.
fair, I don't think you'd name it
I mean,
anyway,
you wouldn't
to be
make
fair.
it that blatant. I mean, but you have to understand the cultural nuances. Moving on from the children, again, we were talking about recruitment. I think when you recruit, you always go for someone that you feel comfortable with. And we need to learn to come out of our comfort zone. And if you have other people from other cultures, you're changing the way you think, you can teach each other. But that doesn't mean if you get someone from, for example, the Black community, the South Asian community, that you expect them to teach the whole team. It doesn't work like that, because I can say for my children, this is really bad, but they don't really speak Punjabi. That's my fault. But they don't. They are more westernized, so they don't even listen to Bhangra music, for example, because they just don't do it. So we have to understand that it's different with the younger generation and our older generation, because we've been brought up in one way, and we can't tar everyone with the same brush. That's something really important. Now the hard bit.
I think we did a bit of a few things actually. Companies that do have diverse workforces are actually shown to be more profitable. There's evidence behind it. And as we're becoming, I don't know where we are now with political situations as they are, but as we're becoming more globalized and the world's becoming more interactive, you have to know what other cultures are doing and what they're thinking. We know that. There's evidence behind that. We did a focus group last year, and this was with service providers. And it was really interesting because the conversation we had was there's a fear of asking certain questions because they don't want to be, and I'm going to use the word, I know Taj used it earlier, she used the word. They don't want to be seen as asking a question that might actually be racist. And when we've had those conversations, it actually took me aback, because what that meant was these conversations aren't being had then. In which case it's just, the norm, we just carry on how it is because we're trying to avoid the situation, the elephant in the room, essentially. And this is where Taj mentioned earlier, it's that relationship building. We're having conversations with service providers, doesn't matter what colour, whatever they are, but we're having a good conversation. There's a few people here we've worked with, we can have a good laugh with them. They might throw, and it's a relationship building. It's not going to happen in one day, it's going to take time. And unfortunately, we're in a situation where no one has time anymore, right? Again, it comes down to that long-term view. If you actually want to save money, it's actually easy if you build the relationship. So you can say, hey, can you help me out with this? And the answer is going to be yes, because you built that relationship. But we're so singular thought of, I need to get this done. I need this output. I need to see 100 people from diverse communities. It doesn't actually matter which diverse communities it is. It's just so singular. And until we get out of that sort of frame, it's not going to change. It just is not going to change, because those relationships, we're still stuck in, the South Asian groups are here. Especially in London, you see it quite a lot. Certain areas have got certain communities. It happens. But the communities actually want to open up themselves as well. You should have seen our event. They loved it. I mean, we were like, get involved in the dancing. They loved it. Because it comes down to it's not you versus us. It has to be an us situation for things to change. And I do agree. I mean, in regards to children, I totally agree with that. I mean, we're in a different generation where the culture is very different, but we do a number of events specifically for children. So we do loads of sports events. We've got loads of kids, because one of the things that we were really keen on, in fact, when we did the Bhangra project, the Bhangra project, because you have to change the accent there, we actually found it's actually a really nice way to join generations as well, because there seems to be a real big divide now between the older generation in the South Asian community and the younger generation. And that was a way of actually, they're all just having fun together. So one thing we are finding is just get them in a room, have fun, everyone's enjoying themselves, and that just breaks down so many barriers. And one thing with whenever we do events, it's not singularly just about that event. We do wellbeing workshops, for example. And I know Taj has said this so many times. We don't just talk about those specific issues that are in the room. We actually talk about everything, all social issues around it.
Safe space.
Safe space. And then once you start a conversation, and once we've started to talk about our lives, and we do talk about things like miscarriage, domestic abuse, we talk about what's happened in our lives, then we get other people saying, hey, look, this happened in my life. Or I know someone that it's happened to. And it opens up that conversation. So although you're doing group consultations, you'll probably have one-to-one conversations outside. If you start telling your own story and people start showing case studies, for example, of personal experience, because it's, again, that relationship, isn't it? You've just revealed something that's really, you're something sensitive for you, and so someone else will then respond to that as well. And we're finding that quite a lot. We're getting loads of domestic abuse cases that we're having to signpost for as well. So again, relationship building is the main thing for us.
That's about time.
Oh, sorry,
Right.
no more questions. I hope we answered everything you wanted answered. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate the one question, because we don't stop talking as soon as you've asked one question.
Thank you to Festival of Tomorrow for having us as well.
Yeah, and we are doing, we do have the Changing Suits podcast, and we are bringing it back this year as well. So please do tell others about it. It's really important. Not only it is primarily for the South Asian community, but it is being used as a sort of way in to sort of understand the community as well. So please do pass that message on. Plus, we do loads of stuff in Swindon, so I'm sure you've all heard
And
about
we're
it as
going
well.
into London as well now, aren't we?
Yes. There we are. Have we done a promo? www.changingsuits.org. That's all for me. Thank you again, Festival Tomorrow, and yeah, that's it.